this is an economic crisis, but I know you would be the first to say it is first and foremost a personal human crisis. Give us your sense of the perspective on the overall crisis we're facing.
Well, I think it's clear it's a healthcare crisis. There's this virus out there that we're all in a war, and everybody in the world has one common enemy, and that's to win the war against this virus. And now that is a humanitarian crisis, and that there's people that are hit by it and sick, and we got to make sure they're taken care of it. And then we got to take care of the rest of society so they don't get it, which means how you run your company, how you think about how you deploy your resources and stuff has changed dramatically over the last few weeks. Have we gone into social distancing, all to stop the virus and win the war on that? When we win that, the economic impact will be mitigated, and that's what you could see in the economy before it hit us, and that's what we expect to see in the economy after it hits us.
So how have you reordered your priorities at Bank of America? You just said that if you run a company, you have to reorder your priorities for this particular crisis. Give us an example of how you're reordering Bank of America's priorities.
Well, we took a quick look and said, in the end of the day, our response has to be team-centric. In other words, protect our team, get our team in a position so they can support the customers, even if they're working from home. And then it has to be client-centric, what we do for our customers, whether commercial customers or consumer customers, and ultimately, how do we help society? So if you think about the team, the number one issue was how can you do all the work that we do with this great team working every day across this wonderful platform, but do it in a way that's never been contemplated, with 150,000 teammates went from working in the office to working from home across 4 or 5 weeks. And, the logistics in that, the network connectivity embedded in that, the ability to distribute calls differently, to have people ultimately ability to trade from home. But on the other hand, we had to have 4,300 branches. We had to keep them open so cash could move in society. We're an essential industry, as labeled by the federal government, that we have to be open, and we have to be able to keep the securities markets open, and that takes centralized operations groups. So we had to also reposition how our traders and our teammates in the branches and our teammates in the call centers and our teammates in the operations groups worked at the same time. So we had this massive movement of hundreds of thousands of people to home. At the same time, we had to reposition everybody left to make sure they could operate well.
So when did it first really sink in with you that you were going to have to do something as dramatic as have 150,000 people work from home? I know we all saw you sit next to the president on the president's right when you went down to visit with him. I know you met with some of his staff. Did that help drive home to you just how large this crisis is and it's not going away?
Well, I think as we saw a bit of this play out in our foreign operations. Those of us, companies like ourselves have operations in China and Hong Kong, and the impact in those areas were, first and foremost, gave us a little bit of hint. The belief of what was going to happen in the United States at the time, back in January and early February, was, this was out there and not ours. But as we went through February and we went to heard Dr. Fauci speak at a conference, and then ultimately we went in the White House in early March, the group of bankers expecting to talk to the president about banking and what we're doing for customers and things like that. Suddenly the first thing we did for half the time was to hear from Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and the head of the CDC talk about the healthcare crisis, and that was the night where the president stopped the travel from Europe. And the gravity of the situation, when you heard of the impact that the administration was going to have to the economy, which was at that point almost linear. You could just extrapolate. If you said, I'm going to stop all this movement of people, what will happen? It really settled in on me. And we were running a company and moving people to work from home. We just said we have to go hard and fast. And we really quickly moved from sort of alternating shifts and things like that to complete work from the home. And then, then you start to see the human toll start to build up, the cases and the issues of people in hospital and deaths, which are horrible.
Brian, as you said, this is first and foremost a healthcare crisis. At the same time, the best way to fight it is actually to shut the economy down, which does real damage to the economy at the same time. Let's talk about that, and particularly your vantage into that economy through individuals and small businesses. We now have a plan through this CARES plan, the $2 trillion infusion of capital, where a lot of small businesses can get money fast. Is that going to happen? When are you going to be flooded with applications?
Well, let me back up more broadly. So if you think about what we saw in our customer base, as we went through January and February, we saw with our consumers spending money at a much faster rate, a double-digit rate versus 2019. So the economy is probably going to grow faster than people projected would have been my guess. Then as you went into March and you saw the situation, even with the impact that happened in March, especially in the latter half of March, we'll still see our consumer spending in the aggregate in March, and this has cost $3 trillion in a year, so it's not a small sample, be up for March. Not a lot, but 2 or 3%, something like that. And year to date, it'll be up almost double, high single digits. That is faster than last year versus the year before. So the economy is on this path. It just, as you watch March play out, has changed dramatically. So what the Federal Reserve did is start to do a lot of liquidity programs to stabilize the markets. What Congress passed with its stimulus bill is an effort to keep people employed. And so number one, at Bank of America, we've told our teammates they have a job to year end, which is important, and many other employers have told that. So that to the extent we keep people employed, keep cash into the household, that'll be terrific, and keep a baseline economy growing. The other question is how do you help small businesses do that? And that's the program that's been announced that they're going to implement beginning Friday. The key to that is to how do we get that money out quickly as the bank industry on behalf of Congress and the president and the administration. And, they developed a set of regulations. They are coming out, and they're out in process, and they've been published or they're starting to publish them. We just ask customers to be patient. My advice to customers is go back to their banking, who they already have a lending relationship with, because the kind of documentation is the kind of documentation you work with those banks. We'll have millions of customers come to us, and we'll put them through, if they desire, into the program, and it'll be very good because they can continue to pay their employees. That's what the money is geared to do, and also cover some overhead, both of which are good things to help these small businesses through this tough time. And we'll do, we're setting up shop and activating thousands of people to be able to take the applications, a huge digital presence, and I think if everybody can just do it in an orderly fashion, it'll be very good for the U.S. economy.
In order to get the money out the door, which is what the small business needs so badly, because they often don't have the money to keep their employees on payroll, are you willing to take something of a leap of faith? Are other banks willing to take a leap of faith? Because you're going to have applications that normally maybe you wouldn't give a loan against, but now the government's saying, well, that'll turn into a grant if they keep their employees. Does that work? Do you have enough faith that you'll actually deploy a lot of cash that way?
Oh, yeah. For the clients, it's a straightforward set of needed documents that they have to supply, and if they supply those documents, they can get a loan and a calculated amount based on the people they paid in the first couple months of the year, and then they can have a forgiveness to continue the people employed after that. And so for this particular element, it's government guaranteed, so it's a government program, and all we are as its banking system, my peer colleagues and stuff, is an implementer of our progress. And let me go to the other side, just so you know, because the strength of our banking system and the capabilities and the capital we've had and built up in the processes, the industry, one of our trade groups announced today, BPI, that the industry had funded more than $400 billion in commercial loans, most of that in the month of March. Bank of America has done $70 billion of loans, commercial loans in this month, still have way more than our required amount of capital, earn money, et cetera. So it's a pretty interesting thing that the banking industry has been able to step up because of its strength and supply to the SME businesses and even large businesses the capital, while the government's coming in and helping the small businesses, which are the hardest to get the money to.
In 2008, 2009, the banks were in constant communication with government authorities, whether it was the Fed, whether it was the Treasury, or others. Is that going on now? What sort of communications are you having back and forth with the federal government?
Well, it depends on the issue, but obviously in terms of the SBA and Treasury program, they sought our opinions on how to make sure they could get the money out in an orderly fashion, the right way, and carry out Congress's intent and the administration's intent, and so we're heavily involved in that. On some of the liquidity and how the markets are working, my colleague Tom Montag and his team are talking to all different parts of the architecture, whether it's the Fed or the Treasury, to talk about what's going on in the markets on a given day and where liquidity is needed or where action is needed. And obviously the Fed is talking to us from what are we seeing in the markets, and so the OCC and other regulators, what are you seeing from clients? What are you hearing out there? Because you want an instant transmission mechanism, because a lot of the data people look at is lagging just by definition. It has to be put together and reported.
All of us, in our own ways, are trying to live day to day, week to week, and get through this crisis. But I would like to look forward just a little bit. Some economists are talking about now the possibility of demand destruction, being permanent reduction in consumption because of this crisis. As you look at it, is there a risk of that? How large a risk is there?
At the end of the day, one of the things that is great is if you think about the throughput of the U.S. economy, if we, with the amount of stimulus, the amount of fiscal support that's coming, the amount of monetary support, if you look at economists with their 25% down in the second quarter and then working their way out, the sheer amount of dollars in that at a $5 trillion quarterly economy, $20 trillion a year, is overwhelmed by the amount of support coming in the markets. All that is geared to getting us out the other side of this faster. There was no structural issues in the economy. It's a healthcare crisis, and I think if we mitigate that healthcare crisis, you will see on the other side of this, a rebound, and that's what our economists say. So as people have adjusted their second quarter down more due to the unemployment, the new claims last week, what people are guessing will happen this week, there'll be a deeper downdraft, but most of the economists that I see and our internal economists believe on the other side is a reversion back to where the economy almost gets back to the same size, at some time in next year that it was prior to this, which is a pretty fast turnaround. And so, I think that's the core belief, because you're not changing anything fundamentally about the business cycle, about what's going on. You're saying if you get by this virus, it works. If you look at China right now, you're seeing the data get stronger. And because in the fact they're on the other side of this situation, and you're seeing, we're seeing that when I talk to our commercial clients, that their factories that they work with is 65, 70, 75% up. We're seeing goods and ship coming out of China, and you're seeing those factories start up, and even in some of the places that were most affected, you're seeing people go out and shop. So the question between us and that is going to be when the consumer feels comfortable going out and going to a restaurant and going to shop at a store and do things like that. That will come when the healthcare crisis is solved, and that obviously there's tremendously talented people and a great healthcare system, the best in the world, working on that every day. And when that happens, whatever time that is, that's when the behavior will revert back, and it's just a matter of how fast we can get there.
Brian, as chairman and CEO of Bank of America, how do you start to plan about how we do get to the other side of this? You must be thinking already about what's the best way to position yourself to come out the other side. You said already you're going to keep all your employees through 2020 at least, so that's one step in that direction. How are you planning that process? How should we be looking at that?
Well, I think number one, on our employees, teammate side, we basically said, all of you have jobs. Don't worry about that. Help us serve our clients. We provided backup child care for people so that they could not only, because as child care centers to close down, people either had to come to work or work from home, needed help. So we had them, we gave them $100 a day to hire anybody they could to take care of the kids to help. We've increased the minimum wage this month, went up to $20 an hour across our platform. We told our summer kids, which are about 1,800 kids, we said, you all have jobs. Don't worry about it. You'll work 10 weeks. We'll pay you for 10 weeks. We'll figure out exactly how we'll conduct that work. We told our permanent employees, you're going to all have jobs. We hired 2,000 plus people during the month of March to keep filling up our client service capabilities. And we've repositioned thousands of teammates to help the teammates who are affected by the disease. We took the the high-risk people right off the line right away. So we've been doing all this stuff to make sure our teammates have financial security, job security, wage security, and health security. And that was the number one thing. And then behind that, on the clients, the same thing. We basically said to the clients on the consumer side, if you're affected by this virus and if you need to defer a payment, call us up. And we've helped, 200,000 or 300,000 clients have already called us and taken advantage of the ability to defer a payment. Ultimately, when they get back to work, or they'll catch back up. But the idea is that if they are suffering from employment. So on the consumer side, we've done that. On the commercial side, you talked about the government programs. I talked about what we've done overall. But all this comes from the quality of the enterprise we have. And then it goes to the question of communities. We did $100 million in charitable giving. We, yesterday, to help small businesses, announced a $10 million program to CDFIs for their operating expenses, and then announced a $250 million capital investment. And what's a CDFI? It's a community development financial institution, which are these local institutions that work with the hardest borrowers to work through the process. So we're doing that. So if you think about that, whether it's society in terms of charity, society in terms of supporting small businesses, our own balance sheet and what we're doing in lending, and then what we're doing for our teammates, our job is just to push our company in front of this, and that's how we got to do it.